All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Welcome to the Boardroom Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Mayshawn Wilson, Global Business Strategy and Operations, Go-to-Market Ads Policy at Google, Combat Vet, Duke MBA, and West Pointer. Today, we have my guest, Mr. Al Vallejos. Al is going to talk with us about preparing to transitioning to corporate healthcare, both from a project management perspective, but also his real estate background that he does on the side. So Al is a regional service manager for Siemens Healthineers. He's a co-founder for Service First, and he's also heavily dedicated as a real estate investor. Does a lot of work in that space. He served as a field artillery officer and a West Point University diversity admissions officer, partnership manager at Johnson & Johnson, and project manager at GE Healthcare. He's a graduate of West Point and NYU's Stern School of Business. So Al Vallejos, he's kind of showed me the way in field artillery, and so I'll let him take it from there.
Hey, Sean, how are you? Thanks so much for having me on. It's a privilege and good to see you, my friend.
It's been a long time, Al. You know, I was a firstie, so it's been more than a few years.
Yeah, I mean, I was a captain in the Army, but this seemed like a long time ago. Yeah, you're right.
How the years fly by. So for those that don't know about you, Al, give us some background, where are you coming from? How did you end up in the military?
So, yeah, I'm actually from central New Jersey. So I've been in the Northeast for a while. You can probably tell from my accent. After high school, or while I was in high school, I actually looked up to somebody who was applying to go to West Point. And that's kind of how I found out about the academy. I've heard about West Point because you just kind of heard those two, the word and the name. And I didn't really know what it meant. I didn't know it was a college. I didn't know it meant you go to the Army afterwards. I wasn't really sure what it all meant. But, lucky enough, when I started high school, I did have a good friend who was applying to the academy at the time, and he kind of told me about it. He did the research, and then I kind of kept looking into it as high school went on. Applied, got accepted, and the rest is history.
There it is. And so, did anybody in your family serve in the military at all, or are you just kind of hey, high school was the thing, and that was it?
Yeah. Actually, no. And it's interesting because I'm actually first generation. My parents came over. My dad immigrated here from Peru. My mother from Dominican Republic in the late '70s. So they kind of came here, blue collar, just work. Never really had much of a long generation of American background, back family to really kind of know West Point and learn what it was. So the Army in general, military in general, was all kind of new to me when I got to high school.
It was a bit of a culture shock then adjusting then.
Yeah, well, for them coming to the States, yes. For me going into the military, no, because my dad was pretty strict. The military was actually a little bit of an ease. He eased up a little bit when I got to the academy because again, my dad was a firm believer in making sure if you do something wrong, he lets you know about it. So that's it.
Good structure, good discipline, getting you ready for the Army.
Yep.
And so you were an artillery officer in the Army, and then after you transitioned into the reserves for a bit. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm actually still in the reserves, actually. So I did transition. As soon as active duty finished, I decided to kind of stay part-time. And I think it was a great decision. It's really given me a lot of opportunities to still do things here and there with the military. I actually went back to admissions last year for about 6 months to help out when they had a gap in coverage. And I don't know if you knew that or not, but I was there. I think it was about a year ago, 2020, when they had the virus, when COVID was I guess, changing some timelines with military PCS moves. They had kind of like a gap. We still know people in admissions. As a reservist, you can always take some time off from your civilian employer to go do good things for the Army. And it just worked out because I was here locally.
And so you were back working your old job or working as a Malo? Tell us some more about that.
Yeah, so I was actually covering down in the soldier section. So if you remember admissions, you got the soldier admissions, regional officer that kind of focuses on, again, active duty applicants to apply to West Point. So it was a fun 6 months. It really was going back for a little bit,
That's nice. So can you tell us, when you decided to transition, why did you decide to, go from active duty to being a reservist, and why have you decided to stay?
Yeah, so, I think like everybody at that 5-year mark, you start thinking about, all right, I can kind of move on and say goodbye to the Army. So I was always kind of on the fence. Do I want to stay? Do I want to get out? I kind of came to the conclusion I did want to, taste corporate America or taste entrepreneurship and do different things outside the military. But I also thought it was still could be beneficial, especially if you change your mind and you want to kind of go back to maybe stay in as a reservist. So that's kind of my decision to kind of stay stay in on a part-time basis. But, I will admit that when I first made that transition, the reserves were very low on my priority because I was so focused on trying to get the next, path started, which was trying to pursue graduate school opportunities and just find work to make sure I still had a paycheck. So that's kind of where my first focus went to as I was transitioning. And when like everybody, I was thinking of where I want to be, when I was, where do I want to actually live now that I'm done with the military? What kind of career fields do I want to be involved in? So, that all kind of went through my mind, what I actually like doing. But, some things were kind of definite. I definitely knew I wanted to go to grad school, and I definitely knew I wanted to keep working. So it kind of made me look at the option of maybe pursuing grad school on a part-time basis and pursuing full-time work, which is kind of what I did once I transitioned.
And so in doing that transition and balancing it, did you know, hey, I wanted to go into healthcare and this opportunity came about to where you could go to grad school? Or was this kind of a way to like figure out what you wanted to do and grad school became an opportunity?
Yeah, it's interesting. Initially, I didn't really know what would be the best fit for me in corporate America, to be honest. So I kind of really didn't know what I wanted to do in regards to what industry, or I kind of knew I wanted to get involved in project management or operations again. So initially, I took a role in a small chemical plant as an operations manager in New Jersey, just because, like I said, I still wanted to make sure I had a paycheck as I was trying to really maybe see what I'm going to be doing long term. So I did that for about a year. And throughout that year, I actually learned Hurricane Sandy, I'm not sure if you remember, it hit New Jersey pretty hard around that time. And the chemical plant I was managing at the time, they actually pretty much had to get rehabilitated. And me as the operations manager there took a lot of, I guess, management of contractors in regards to, people needed to come in and fix the chemical plant. So I actually got a lot of experience on kind of that world in regards to managing contractors, HVAC, plumbing, electricity. So I started, kind of having that in my mind as something that was pretty cool, even though that wasn't my primary job there. It ended up being the only job I did there for a year. And that actually led to my next role, which was at GE Healthcare, where when I went in as a project manager, my primary responsibility at GE Healthcare was to work with hospitals, their contractors, their facilities managers on preparing and planning for, diagnostic imaging equipment to be, purchased and installed in their hospitals. So MRs, CAT scans. So it kind of led to the other. And that's the reason why they actually were interested in, I got that opportunity at GE Healthcare because they saw I was in the military for 5 years. So good project management skills, right? All military officers usually have pretty good project management skills. But now that I was at a chemical plant, again, I didn't even know if I was going to be there long term. But because I got a year of just working with contractors and rehabilitating a chemical plant, they thought I had enough to be dangerous. So it gave me the opportunity to kind of come into GE Healthcare and manage the installations and the implementations of their diagnostic imaging equipment, which is very expensive equipment. There's a lot of money that goes around that world in regards to preparing the space, the hospitals, and everything else. So that's kind of like my initial kind of transition into healthcare, actually.
And so from there, did you know, like, hey, I really like healthcare and I want to stay in it, or just it was continually interesting and you're like, hey, I like this as long as it's still kind of cool?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Initially I just thought of it as an opportunity to get into GE because GE was really I always knew them as a large company. It was different, obviously different companies within. So I was like, this is great to get in with a bigger company, get some experience, and then maybe I can move to a different division. And I actually ended up just liking healthcare. And it was funny when I went to, as I started having more dialogue with hospitals and with some of the customers I used to work with, and kind of like seeing the urgency that they would have on having equipment, good equipment installed, whether it was GE or depending which vendor it was, when they would get like a new MRI or a new scanner, they'd be extremely excited because they would say, now we know that we're getting better equipment that's going to better serve, our customers, which ultimately makes everybody feel good because when you're getting scans, depending on whatever sickness or what healing you need, the imaging equipment does play a large role in your recovery. So it was, that kind of rubbed off on me now because I'm like, well, I'm kind of partners with the hospital doing this because I'm on the side of helping them implement that equipment into their facilities.
That's a good point. And so while you were at GE, they gave you the opportunity to go back to grad school, or is that something that you just kind of like finagled in there? How did that work out?
So I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the best opportunities that GE did a lot for me. But one of the best things they did is they actually had a great tuition reimbursement policy. So after a year of being with the company, they allow you to, be eligible for their tuition reimbursement policy, which I don't think it's the same way it was when I was there. But when I was there, it was 100% of tuition is covered with no cap. So I had the ability to, pretty much any school I could do on a part-time basis. They were going to cover the expenses on a reimbursement. After you pass the class, and you send them the transcript, or you send them the proof of the grade, and then your next paycheck they send you the cost of that class. So that's kind of how the reimbursement policy works. So to answer your question, yeah, I went to NYU's Third School of Business, which has a great part-time MBA program in New York. So it's kind of where I was located, and it worked out fine where GE was supportive of it, and they actually reimbursed the whole entire program to me.
And are those programs typically like, hey, once you serve your year, you're kind of eligible for the program, or do you have to be selected by your manager? Just varying.
Yeah, you still have to get manager approval. So after a year, you're eligible to get the program, the tuition reimbursement program from GE Healthcare, but you still need your manager support. So a lot of times I'll ask the question like, when you plan on doing this, nighttime, weekend, you can't tell them you're going to do it during the day while you're working, obviously, because you're going to be working. But things like that, you have a discussion on kind of what the plan is, how long you plan on doing it for. And a little caveat to it, I mentioned it before, GE specifically when I was there, and I was part of that tuition reimbursement program. They actually did have a policy in place where every tuition, you have to reimburse the company years as well. So I ended up working up to, I had to work more years for GE, or else I'd owe them some of that reimbursement if I left early.
It's almost like what do they call it? Not the tuition assistance that they have in the Army, but GradSo, almost like that kind of option.
A little bit, but I remember GradSo being a little bit rough. Like it was like a 3-for-1 or something. GE wasn't like that. Yeah, GE was a little bit more fair. I think they were like a 1-for-1 or something like that.
No, that makes sense. And so along those lines, you said you do a lot of project management, and you're currently working as a regional service manager. Kind of what does that mean in like regular English? So like if you're telling a new captain, new lieutenant transfer out, what does that mean?
So I went into project management. Then I took an opportunity at Johnson & Johnson to be a partnership manager because they were implementing a robot, actually with Google, a few years ago. I forget where they left off because I'm not with them anymore, but I know that they had a joint venture with Google to create a digital surgical robot. And that was kind of the reason why I came on the Johnson & Johnson team. But that was going to be very similar to GE, where you work with the hospitals and you implement, this new capital equipment. So that's why that opportunity came to me at Johnson & Johnson. Did that for a few years, and then that whole implementation and the launch of that product delayed heavily. So I started kind of looking for work again, and that's where I came across the Siemens healthcare opportunity, service operation manager. So to keep it simple, I manage service engineers that install and they service and maintain the diagnostic imaging equipment that are in the hospitals right now. So I have a team of over 12 engineers in the New York City metro area that specifically, that go in and service our customers who have service contracts with us. So Siemens Healthcare, GE Healthcare, Philips, all these large medical equipment providers, they sell the equipment, but one of the big revenue opportunities for them is the service, because the machines do go down. They're like cars. They're like anything else. You need to continuously service them. And obviously, when a CAT scan goes down or an MRI goes down, and you have 30 patients waiting, they pay premium money to make sure they have a service engineer that's there to be able to get them back up and scanning, because that's money out of their pockets every second they're down. So I manage that team that does that, is what I currently do for Siemens.
That makes a lot of sense. And so from there, do you feel like you had the requisite knowledge to really understand what was going on from like a medical perspective? Because it's one thing to manage a project when you're talking artillery shells or admissions of diverse and talented candidates. How did you come up to speed on the healthcare side of what you do?
Yeah, and healthcare is huge. So there's different aspects of it. I say I'm very comfortable. What I did at GE was a similar world. So at GE, I would manage the installations, work with the customer, and then also at the same time, I'd work with engineers temporarily who would install the equipment. I mean, now I manage those engineers on the service side. So a lot of the language I know now was probably, through my years at GE, because they speak the same language. They're actually major competitors. GE and Siemens are probably, considering themselves each, strong competitors, from one another. So yeah, a lot of what I do now, I'd say I picked up from, my time at GE Healthcare, but that's really the language of the medical portion. I mean, obviously everything else that comes into managing engineers isn't much different than being a company commander or, I would say probably a little bit of a more mature company with a little bit, older NCOs per se, very skilled technicians. It's very similar, to be honest. So I think a lot of the basic characteristics of this role, very similar to being an Army officer. In fact, a lot of my counterparts are former Army officers. I mean, it's just kind of the way it is. A lot of people, you'll be surprised. You won't be surprised, but I notice it more now. A lot of people don't like jobs where they have to tell people what to do every day. And I don't love it all the time either, but I can do it because of our time in the military. But, that's why the GE time and the Johnson & Johnson time was great to kind of get away from that, because I didn't have anybody directly reporting to me. I was more just putting people together and doing projects and, on the project management side. Now I'm kind of back in the, managing people, which is cool in a way too, because they, I love it when I talk to some of my engineers today and they're like, man, the guy before you it was rough working for him. And, he just didn't really connect and he really didn't know leadership. Just, again, things like that. It makes you feel good that because of the time in the military and because of the experience at GE Healthcare, I'm pretty comfortable in this role where I am now.
You mentioned there are a lot of similarities to what you did in the military in terms of like managing and leading a company or a battery. What are some of the differences in management leadership in your space? How does it look different than managing soldiers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say that the biggest difference I see now is that a lot of people in my industry now have been around a long time. The military, for the most part, is a younger, even your most senior NCOs are, late 30s. It's just, this is a different, so the amount of technical knowledge, and again, not to take anything away from anybody that ever served me in the Army, it's just that the years don't really compare. I mean, I have some of the engineers that work here for me right now, or, they started working as an engineer when I was born, literally like 2 or 3 guys. So they've been around a long time, and it's a little different. That's the biggest difference I see from, the Army, where the Army is really a younger, for the most part, it's a younger atmosphere, which, when I was a platoon leader, I mean, some of my soldiers were a little older, some of my soldiers were around my age, but for the most part, everyone was like kind of like below 40. So that's what I've kind of noticed is the biggest difference. And that in the Army, it does seem that, everyone's kind of always has to look, because it's such a younger environment, everyone's always looking for what's next, regardless, even if you're an NCO or an older NCO. But over here, most people are career people. Like, you don't have a lot of movement in the people I manage now. Like I was saying, a lot of them have been here since I was born, or some of them have been here since I was born. But for the most part, everyone's like 20 plus years, and they want to stay. This is a very niche type experience to do in regards to service and medical equipment. So they're probably not going to be changing industries or doing something different. This is their life. So it's very important to them. And again, the Army is very important to all of us while we were there. But there is always that thought of what's next. And you don't really get a lot of that thought from the engineers here at Siemens.
So a bit of a pivot in terms of the seniority, the longevity of people and their experience, and then also just the different aspects of how you lead and motivate people. That's what I'm kind of pulling out. No, very helpful. I think along those lines, you mentioned a lot of great points. When you did your initial transition, kind of taking a step back, did you use any programs or headhunters? Like, how did you kind of go about it, or how did you even start thinking about it?
I actually did. And again, the reason why I did, again, I don't know if that's always the best way to go. I think now it seems like, I don't know, I feel old, but it seems like there's a lot of different ways to network now than there was when I was transitioning, even though not that long ago. I did use a headhunter, and I believe it was Orion, I forget, but I did use a headhunter to initially get me my first job. So if there was an opportunity that came across through the headhunter, I knew I wanted to be here in the Northeast. So that was my primary motivation when I was transitioning, was to try to find work here, because I didn't want to go back, west, or I didn't want to move at this point. I was kind of wanted to settle here in the Northeast where I still have family and friends. So that was kind of like my primary motivation. But I knew that initial job wasn't, and again, maybe it was a bad way to think about it, but I just knew it wasn't going to be a long-term thing. I knew that I kind of wanted to just keep getting a paycheck and kind of keep doing things that, are similar to what I did in the Army in regards to just managing people. So that's kind of how I looked at taking that first opportunity. It was through a headhunter, but it was, again, looking back, I'm not sure if it's the best way to go about it, but it was the way I went about it that kind of gave me a little bit of time, bought me a little time to kind of get into what I consider what I really do like doing, maybe for a longer term.
Interesting point. Kind of along those lines, Al, I'm also curious, right? You have your job in healthcare, you do corporate, you also have these side ventures at Service First, the jewelry company that, you founded or co-founded, and you're also a real estate investor. Can you talk about like how you manage some of those side ventures because some of them seem like they're quite busy, right? Like you told me you're building have several units of housing and have several properties all over the Northeast. So just curious,
Yeah.
we talk about some of those things.
Yeah, and it all started in, we can hit on a few things, but we can start with just maybe the real estate real quick. Real estate, when I was transitioning out of the military, I always knew just from, just like everybody else, it's always real estate always seems like a good idea to learn about or get in or maybe get, invest in. So initially, as I was transitioning out of the military, my first investment property was right outside of West Point, where my last assignment was as a diversity admissions officer. So, I just, I saved a little bit of money over the years, did an investment, borrowed some money from some other, other grads, other friends, some family, built a nice duplex, rented it out, refinanced it. Again, not a big money maker, just something like a nice project, but it was just kind of something I always knew I wanted to do. And it's interestingly enough, as I continue to do those smaller little, small, I call them small, but I guess small compared depending on what what you consider big or small in the real estate world. I kept doing these projects kind of on my own. And it did have a lot of similarities in what I was doing at GE Healthcare. So at GE Healthcare, again, I used to work with a lot of contractors on getting the equipment ready, or getting the sites ready for the equipment. So that the language was very similar to what I was doing kind of every night or every weekend when I was meeting with contractors on some of my real estate projects. So that made it a little easier because I wasn't intimidated by the whole process of finding a plumber to give me a quote on, what's going to cost for the duplex. Things like that were kind of common because I was in that world already when I was at GE Healthcare. So to answer your question on how it's done, yeah, it's just, luckily for me, I'm one of those people that I like to stay busy. So my downtime is usually that side hustle time.
No, that makes sense. I mean, since I've known you now, I feel like you're always hustling, doing something.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of backstory about the Service First jewelry company?
Yeah, that's great. So we're actually, it's good. I'm glad that we get a chance to talk about Service First. So the reason why, Service First, my involvement in Service First really started, my mom actually worked in the jewelry district for years. That was her job that was her first job when she came over from the Dominican Republic in the late 70s. So she has a lot of experience in jewelry. So she actually, throughout when I was a cadet and even as a military officer, she always used to help a lot of my friends or any referrals get engagement rings. So we initially, and when I say we, obviously, Mike Burns, me and him talked, we stayed in touch over the years, even after diversity admissions, and we thought there was a good, there was an opportunity here. We have, your mom's got a lot of experience in this. We both like to hustle. We both have a good network with the military. We can maybe, find a way to make this company and, make it profitable. So we started the process. It's been through a lot of iterations. It's changed a lot. So initially, what we thought it was going to be isn't what it is today in regards to it being, an engagement, a company that does engagement rings. We went through a lot of learning and we're at a point right now where we know kind of what we want to do and the price points we want to do, but it took us years. And, like we were talking about before, it's just one of those things that me and Mike kind of, and we got backed by a venture capital company that's extremely supportive, and we've had other investors. So we've had a lot of people kind of give us ideas, and literally it's been a lot longer than we expected to kind of hit the market. But the process, I think, was very interesting because, like I said, we started, my involvement started by my mother just having experience in engagement rings, and we're in a complete different place right now for Service First. We're looking at a different product line. We're looking at, partnering with schools for their athletic symbols and selling those to their alumni. So the model completely changed, but it kind of had to kind of go this way for us to know that this is probably going to be the next step with the company.
So if I pull out the right nuggets out of there, so a combination between kind of knowing what your skills and expertise are in, whether that's your mom, jewelry experience, you and your mentor or your buddy Mike, you guys know that you guys like to hustle, leveraging your network, and then from there just kind of, continuing to persist and being able to shape and adjust your idea as circumstances evolve.
And just to kind of add to that, just bring people together, like, bringing the right people together. So my mom had a lot of experience to this. So again, she would never start a business on her own in regards, but, we had a good network with the military, and we both are former military officers, and we both like business. We like the idea of entrepreneurship. So, put us all together. We'll try to maybe make something out of it. That's kind of like, I guess, the takeaway is just, if you have a good idea and you have a little bit of a passion towards it, get the right people involved, try to make it happen. It's not all what you can bring to the table. Sometimes it's what you can get everyone else to bring to the table.
And so from that perspective, since you know, like, hey, you like to hustle, like you have the entrepreneurial spirit, why did you decide to kind of take the corporate route in addition to your side hustle as opposed to just like diving head on into the entrepreneurship? Can you talk
Yeah,
about
you know,
that?
yeah, and I still to this day don't know if I'll be in corporate America forever. I mean, I do like what I do now. I think it will get to a point where financially I wouldn't have to work for corporate America, and I think I'm maybe almost at that point now. I don't really don't know because I like to always work. So if I had the time to work, I'll probably keep working. But you make a great point, and that is actually probably some important piece of advice I'll say. Don't be scared to just jump out of corporate America. I kept on it because it didn't stop me from doing what I had to do. At least I thought it did at the time. I didn't think it was at the time, but maybe it has slowed me down. Maybe I could have had like 5 more properties by now if I would have just took a little bit of a risk and not worried about a stability, stable income for a year or two, and maybe I could have really propelled. So I will say that looking back, I definitely would probably look a little harder at like you said, maybe just dabbling into it because you know it's really not that long. It doesn't take that long really to get to get yourself in the right position if you really have a good plan in place. So I will say I think that's kind of where I was at. It didn't stop me from doing my side hustles, but I still do wonder if it slowed me down. And again, I think I'm almost at the point where I could focus primarily on my entrepreneurship and things of that nature. But I guess we'll see. I kind of play day by day and see when you really want to walk away or stay with it for a little bit, maybe stay on a contract basis. Who knows? There's different ways to kind of just get what you want out of whatever you're looking to do.
In several opportunities, they all kind of mess with what you're trying to do. And if you had felt like, hey, these are a hindrance, you might have gone a different direction.
Absolutely.
Those are big points. And kind of circling back to lessons learned, you mentioned where you're trying to go. Were there any like either books or podcasts or like particular like personalities that you listen to where you're like, hey, oh, like this person sets a good like example or heads in the right direction?
I listen to a lot of stuff. I watch a lot of YouTube. I listen to a lot of different things. I can't recommend anything specific. In general, what I'll say though is, and actually it's interesting. I did read this book the other day, and this is actually a pretty good one. I don't know if you can see it.
Okay. Straight shooter.
Yeah, I stopped by Stephen. I stopped by Stephen at a book signing a few months ago. And again, I'm not a huge Stephen A. fan. I'm okay with Stephen A. He's fine. I like sports. I think the book was interesting about you want to become successful. I think the biggest thing I took away is just be honest with yourself. A lot of times in the military, you can't be right. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. It's a very bureaucratic system. You're in the military. It's just a different world. Once you're able to, once you decide to leave and you decide to kind of like focus on yourself and what you want to do long term, I think being honest with yourself and who you are is very important. Like, be a straight shooter, and that does carry a lot of weight in regards to if you want to do like entrepreneurship and you do want partnerships. Like me and Mike, we consider ourselves almost like, like brothers where there's like a lot of trust there because we've always been honest with each other as friends. So, being honest with yourself and being honest with the people you plan on working with moving forward, I think is extremely important. So yeah, I would say that things like that and people like that in regards to trying to find honesty is very important, because sometimes you don't even know you don't realize what's good for yourself. If you talk to the right people that care about you, they kind of even know already, like, I don't really think that's you, and it just really helps you a lot to just make a better decision when feeling comfortable going, a certain route.
Great points in terms of having good mentors and a good relationship. And so in terms of asking those questions of like, nah, that's not you, or like, this is the right fit. What were some of those questions you were asking yourself, like going through this process?
Yeah. Right. I mean, the first thing I always asked myself when I was like thinking through this, again, I didn't ask it like in the room, asking myself, it was in my head is, I always knew I wanted to, like all of us, I wanted to make sure I was financially prosperous. I maximize what I could do financially without like selling my soul. And when I say sell my soul, like, I never had any interest in being a banker and working 24/7, even though I know they make bank. So I always used to have my, like the parameters in place. But I always thought of myself, and again, there's people that do great things that don't even care about money. And I think that's a great thing. But I always was interested in maximizing somehow, financially. So that was always in the back of my head. So how I was going to get there, I never knew. But I did learn a little early on it probably wasn't, if I was ever going to maximize myself financially, it's most likely going to be on something I do in the entrepreneurship world, because to become the CEO of like Siemens Healthcare is not only is it hard, it's probably not me. This probably not who I'll ever be. I mean, I could always have these experiences and work for different companies and be a contributor, but to maximize, get to the highest levels in corporate America is a lot different than getting to the highest levels of entrepreneurship, because you control a lot of what you're doing. You're not necessarily relying on somebody else to promote you. So as we discussed, I think long-term play is going to be on the, entrepreneurship and that type of world. I guess it can go either way on what you decide to do. But what I was thinking about a lot was, how can I maximize financially? And that kind of led me to a lot of what I do today.
Those are great questions. Kind of like, how do you maximize like knowing what your goal is, but also knowing how much you're willing to sacrifice in the process?
Right.
And did you know banking was just going to be like that terrible, or was it just because you had like did it? Like, what was the?
Well, I didn't know, but I guess everyone kind of hears about it, right? They work long hours and make a lot of money. That's just kind of the word going around. And, it's just, I could have been completely off on that, but that's what I heard, and that wasn't me. That wasn't me. I feel there's an easier way to make it some way. Maybe there's an easier way to do it. So I always try to find that easier way to maybe get there, financially. But yeah, it's not easy, and I think those are the biggest questions. Like, what do I want to do? Like, some people want to be, there's grads that, get out that they still want to actually make a living, but they don't really, care about making like corporate money. They're good just working for a nonprofit, or they're working, back in, local government. I mean, there's, it's really, and I think that's the question you ask yourself. That's one of the important questions to ask yourself. What do I like? What am I okay just having like a certain type of job or career that I'm okay with, not super passionate about, but I feel, and that's really a lot about learning who you are. Like, you kind of, especially when you transition, and you kind of know who you are and what you like. You may not know exactly how you want to get there, but you kind of know what what matters to you. And I think that's important to factor in when you're making this transition. And again, I didn't do a good job of that, my first transition. I kind of just went with it and took an opportunity. But the best way to do it would be to kind of just make sure whatever, to try your best to do something that, fits kind of who you are, because it'll get you to where you want to get to, it'll get you where you want to get to a little faster. I mean, it's a little slower process when you kind of figure it out on the run, which is okay too, which again, like I said, I did a little bit initially when I was making that transition.
So a little bit of soul searching to know kind of what you prioritize, and also like how much time or work-life balance, all that stuff that really matters for you, right? When you grind and be like, the infantryman, and like, hey, I got to get it. Got to burn these hours all day and night. Like something that's a bit more chill.
Right.
And so in looking back over your process, is there anything that you would like slightly change or do differently? You said, you might have gone a different direction than like the headhunter. Are there any other changes that you would make about your path to where you are, either on the corporate side, entrepreneurship side, or education base?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd do differently, probably just looking back on it, because I like doing so much real estate, and because like I've done a lot of it, I probably would have maybe, and I'd advise anyone that wants to get into like real estate on the side, also get a license. I never did for whatever reason. I just never. It doesn't take. I mean, you have to go through the learning, the test, but it does help a lot, because the main thing you can do is you can kind of start doing that. That's like one of the better jobs to do on the part-time basis, from what I learned. So I probably would have done that, just because I think it would have given me a little bit more opportunities in the real estate world, just network-wise, and I may have dabbled into maybe some bigger real estate deals, and maybe some more deals would have came across me if I was doing like real estate agent on the side. So I think if anyone who wants to get into real estate, I recommend getting a license, just because you get an opportunity to network with a lot of owners that have real estate. Sometimes they want to get rid of their properties, and they already know you're the first one to hear about it, so things like that. So that's something I would have probably done differently. And I don't know how beneficial it'll be now, because my wife actually has a license, and I already know a lot of owners now, because I've done a decent amount of developments here in the area. So, but it would have definitely helped a lot if I would have gotten into that world, maybe with a license, through a license, having a real estate or broker license. If I would have done that earlier, it may have expedited some of the projects, because I may have more opportunities in the real estate world.
So finding those certifications that really give you a good, leg up on what's going on.
Yeah, 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 and the network. Like we said, a lot of it's about networking. That's why we do this podcast. I mean, it's kind of just people. Everyone knows everyone shares their stories, and hopefully it benefits everyone. If you put together everyone's background, everyone's story, everyone's lessons learned, you're gonna get some good advice. Because everyone, no one's really mastered it. Is everyone perfect for anybody? So it's these are great to have these podcasts and these discussions. I think they're valuable for everybody.
Definitely, 100% agree. Kind of last few pieces, giving us some really great advice. If you were to tell kind of future veterans following behind you that want to get into whether that's corporate healthcare or into real estate, you mentioned kind of the license. Is there anything else that you were like, hey, I wish you would have told me this like 5 or 10 years ago, and it would have changed my trajectory like night and day?
Yeah, I will say even I kind of dabbled on the real estate thing. I will say for what I do for Siemens Healthcare for GE Healthcare, I think that what helped me the most, to be honest, even get opportunities here was finding other grads in companies you want to work for. That was extremely. That's how I got. That's how I got my first opportunity at GE Healthcare. So the headhunter got me my first opportunity at the chemical plant. But when I was looking for my next move and what I was going to do, I actually reached out to a grad that worked at GE and said, "Hey, I see this opportunity. Do you know anything about it?" And he pushed my resume to the hiring manager, and then I got the interview. So once you do that soul searching, once you find out what you want to do, whether it's a grad from West Point, whether it's a grad from your business school, whether it's just a friend from your personal network that works at the company, don't be shy. You reach out to who you can. Say, I'm looking at doing this. Do you have anyone there? And then next thing you know, even if it's not the right opportunity for you, like I said, you'll at least learn about it. You'll know it's not the opportunity for you because you used your network to get you to have that discussion, and you were able to make a better decision on if it's something you want to pursue or not. So I did that pretty well, actually, but I would say that would have probably that expedites kind of everything. Utilizing people inside your network to kind of at least see what you're trying to do and see if it's a good fit.
Leveraging your network so you can navigate the path. So closing us out, Al, one, we really appreciate your time. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you, learn more about your story? And then are there any other like projects that you're working on that you'd like people to either be aware of or ways they can help you as you're going towards being a real estate mogul or, or entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to find me. Short for Albert Vallejos. I think you'll probably have my name somewhere on the podcast. So just type that name into LinkedIn, and then I'll pop up. I'll be glad to connect with anyone that saw the podcast and has any questions and anything that I kind of brought here. In this short discussion. Glad to help. That's what this was all about. Just giving back. So yeah, that's the best way to find me. And the other project I'm looking at, in addition to just maybe continuing to do a little bit of real estate here and there, like I was looking at a larger project not far from here, but something else I've kind of established just by default. So a lot of the properties I've done, a lot of the real estate stuff I've done, I still manage and own. So I actually, now that my wife has a license, which is a requirement in New York, if you want to have a property management company, I actually did kind of formalize my property management company just because I'm doing it anyway. And now by formalizing the company, I can actually represent other owners legally now. So if there's another grad or there's somebody else in my network here in the area, because I already own my own properties and I have the maintenance workers and I have the ability, the platforms to collect the rent, I kind of formalized that. So that's kind of something new that I'm not going to say I'm jumping into because I've been doing it, but I actually formalized. So anything in regards to the property management world here in the Hudson, New York Valley area, I'm someone that can help with that or give people more information on how that world looks.
Nice. Well, we appreciate it, Al. Always some great nuggets. Always great catching up. Whether it's here in New York or in Puerto Rico, always good times.
Absolutely. Go Yanks. All right. Take care, Mason. Good seeing you, my friend.
Thanks, Al. Peace.